Hey folks, Matt Easton here. Quick appendix to my previous video talking about the fight between Arya, I've been criticised for my pronunciation of Arya, and Brienne of Tarth. And so a number of people, in fact quite a lot of people, have debated whether her blade needle is triangular section or lozenge section, as it's known usually amongst sword aficionados. In other words, flattened diamond section or a kind of lenticular section. But in other words, triangular or kind of double-edged. Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure that if you look at pictures from the show, it appears to be triangular. I realise the replicas are they're not very close to the actual sword used in the show. I believe the one used in the show actually uses an épée blade or something very like an épée blade. However, that's more or less irrelevant, so I don't want to get into a point arguing about whether it's triangular blade or a kind of flattened diamond section, because it doesn't really make any difference. It's about this wide, and when it's about this wide, it will not cut. Now, I fully accept that in the books, needle may be described as a sword that is able to both cut and thrust, but all that tells us is that the sword that they've made in the show is incorrect, basically. So I'm just basing it on the sword in the show. The sword in the show, no matter how sharp you made those edges, will never do any more than scratch someone in a nasty way, which is certainly not going to bother someone like Brienne wearing armour. That's the first point. The second point that people came up with was, one of my criticisms of the fight was that Arya was doing so much cutting with the small sword, and they were going, people go, come on Matt, it's clearly just, you know, a contest, it's like a fencing bout, it's not, she doesn't want to hurt Brienne. I fully understand that, but the cuts are still irrelevant because of the type of sword she's using. Hitting someone with this type of sword is incredibly easy and doesn't indicate skill. To hit someone with something like a longsword or a sabre or a backsword, you know, a fairly weighty cutting sword, is quite difficult because the sword, it moves with a certain amount of inertia and the opponent has longer time to block it. Tapping someone with something incredibly light, like a foil or an épée or a small sword, is insanely easy, and it's far easier than landing successful thrusts. So I don't buy that defense, that argument at all. Arya should not be using cuts with that sword. It doesn't show skill, because landing a cut with that sword, firstly, is easy, far easier than landing a thrust. And secondly, if she does land a cut, what does that represent? A cut with a small sword doesn't represent anything. Indeed, if she did land hits with the point, it might hurt Brienne, although it wouldn't, because Brienne's wearing armour and a small sword can't go through plate armour. But if she did land thrusts and Brienne wasn't wearing armour, yes, absolutely it would wound her, but that's why you're not supposed to use a sharp sword. That's why fencing is done with foils and épées with buttons on the end, unlike this sharp small sword. So there we go, 2 points that I think are important to make. Firstly, it doesn't matter whether it's a triangular section blade or whatever other section blade, you can't cut with the sword like that. Secondly, Arya doing cuts on Brienne doesn't indicate skill, because actually anybody can quite easily hit someone else with something incredibly light like a foil if they're just flicking and whipping with it. But to land a thrust takes far more skill and is far more difficult. I hope that illuminates the debate a little bit more, but thanks for watching. Cheers folks.